All right, in this screencast, I want to provide an overview of the curriculum development project. This is the most extensive assignment or project in the class. So for that reason, we'll be devoting class time to talk more about it. We'll also be devoting class time for you all to work on it and to do some planning and some sharing with myself on your progress and thinking about the tasks. So let's dive in. I put a bunch of documents up on Blackboard. I'm only going to look at a few here. Again, the rest of those we will get to in class because this is a fairly extensive assignment. All right, so the thought here is that you will work in groups, whether that is one large group or maybe two groups, depending on you all. You can talk about that and decide how you want to approach that. But instead of doing a unit plan individually, the idea here is that you will work more like a curriculum development team would do in a county. Usually over the summer, if curriculum needs to be developed, that's when it will happen. A group of teachers will be assigned to a particular topic and will work on it and create materials that the rest of the county either will use or has the potential to use, depending on the county. So that's the goal, not for you to work in isolation, but for you to really work as a group. And thinking before that is that you really need to discuss with one another all the aspects of the individual lessons in the unit. And so as a result of doing it this way, I think the lessons tend to flow a lot better actually than if someone did it individually. Okay, so scrolling down, your task really has 5 main components that are outlined here and spelled out in a little bit more detail later in the document. I'm not going to read that to you. You can do that on your own and we'll discuss in class. The first part is an overview. If you want to think about this more like an abstract of a journal article, I'm going to ask you to think about that and to write some stuff down. But as you'll see on the course calendar, this is really the last thing in its final form that I collect from you. And that's because you might have some initial ideas about what you want to do, but once you start developing the curriculum and all the materials, you may find that you've deviated from your initial plan, and so you'll go back and rewrite the overview to make sure it addresses what you actually did. The second part is the science content background for the lessons. And so this is really, think about it as more like a section of a textbook that describes all of the science that one would need to get up to speed so that they can do this lesson. Okay, so for someone teaching this for the first time, for someone that is teaching this out of field, maybe with a earth-based science background, but is asked to teach biology this year, they're teaching this biology lesson, but they don't really have the content background. And so instead of having to go out and find all this information in a variety of sources, you're going to do that for them and compile it into this one neat little section that provides the background. The third part are the daily lesson plans. Now in class you're going to do a 5E lesson plan, and this will be similar to that. The rubric for that assignment is very detailed. This one is much more coarse-grained because we're not looking at just the individual lesson plans. We are also looking at the entire curriculum. And so the idea is that those lesson plans will be similar to your individual 5E lesson plans, but the scope of this project is larger, and so the rubric for this is a little bit much more actually coarse-grained. All right, so just like that 5E assignment, you'll include all of the materials that one would need to carry out the lessons, all the worksheets, lab handouts, etc. The fourth component are teacher pages, and so these really do two things primarily. One, it provides answers to all the labs and quizzes and exit tickets for the teacher. The second thing it does is it's a way for you to directly speak to teachers that will be implementing this curriculum, to give them information for how to set up a lab, where to purchase materials, just things that will help them implement the curriculum easier. The fifth thing is an assessment, and although it says pre and post assessment, that is really going to be the same thing. The pre-assessment and the post-assessment will, for all intents and purposes, be the same exact assessment so that you can make comparisons between the two. And we'll talk more about that in class, assessment in general, and then this specifically. All right, so that's the 5 main parts. The timeline is in the course calendar. You can see when different aspects of the project are due. A little bit more detail provided here. You can read through that, as I said, on your own, and we will discuss in class. So that's all there for you. Grading policy, I want to talk about this, and then there are really two ways I'm trying to make sure that this goes well for all members of the group. So anytime there's a large group, there's the potential for some people in the group to feel like they did more and others to feel either like they did less or maybe aren't aware that they did less. And so we want to address both of those. All right, so the final grade, what we'll do is I will score it out of the rubric and then multiply that number of points that you've earned by the number of people in the group. And then that number of points you can split up amongst the group however you see fit. Obviously, if you feel like everybody did the same amount of work, you'll split it evenly and everybody will get the same number. If a couple people maybe did more work or took the lead on it and did a lot more, then maybe their grade's a little bit higher than some other people in the group. So that's the way that the final grade is broken down. Every maybe 2 or 3 weeks during the semester, I'll also be doing an interim report. And so that's where I will give you a paper. You'll write down everybody in your group, including yourself, and rank them into 3 categories. Those that exceed expectations, those that meet expectations, and those that fall below expectations. Those that fall below expectations, if your name appears on there multiple times, then we will be having a conference between yourself and me. And so that's one way to make sure that everybody's contributing and to try to avoid any issues that might pop up. Okay, so there's 2 planning documents that I want to look at next to help you think through this. And again, we'll discuss this a little bit more in class. The first is this really sort of large overview document. So the first thing that you'll need to do as a group is decide what next generation science standard you want to address. All right, make sure that that fits. I would you can pick any one that you want. So whether it's middle school, high school, whatever content area. So pick one that you think is going to be manageable. You do have the freedom to pick whichever one you want. And then once you sort of wrap your heads around what that is asking, I want you to think about the primary objective for the unit that students will know or be able to do. So what's the main thing that students should take away or be able to do from this? And then maybe it may be that there are other objectives that are below that main objective, some secondary objectives. And so if you want students to be able to do something or know something that is maybe not the primary reason for doing this, but they also need to know it, you can key in on that as well. But I would stick to the primary and maybe one secondary if there is one at all. Okay, so once you establish that, we get to number 3. How will you know they met it? Okay, so this is the objective. This is what you say you want students to know or be able to do. So how will you know if they can do it? And so what will you assess? How will that assessment take place? All right, and it could be a paper and pencil assessment. It could be some kind of authentic assessment where the students need to, design a lab and conduct it. But some way that you are going to know that they succeeded, and what kind of assessment aligns to that. All right, and then the fourth part of this is to think broadly about the lesson for mathematics' sake. Let's just assume that you have 6 lessons, and it's entirely up to you how many lessons there are. There could be 4 lessons in the unit. There could be 7 lessons in the unit. I'm just picking 6 here because the math is easier to do. So I want you to think about what kinds of things need to take place maybe in the first 2 lessons early in the unit. Okay, what would those lessons need to cover? And then maybe the next 3rd and 4th lesson, what kind of would come next after that, and then finally what would be at the end. Okay, so you're kind of thinking through that 6 lesson cycle and really broadly thinking about it. Okay, so that's what this document is for help you sort of plan that out. And then once you get that figured out, we'll get to this document. A little more specificity here, but still not a full lesson plan. So here now we're going to break it down into the individual lessons. All right, so what is the next generation science standard? What's the curriculum objective? What's that primary objective? Maybe the secondary one that you're trying to address. And then for each lesson, and I've just kind of duplicated the same thing 7 times here, but again, you can pick however many lessons you feel you need to get through this. All right, so what is the objective and or guiding question for that particular lesson? And then an overview, just maybe 2 or 3 sentences that describe the lesson. And then the thing that I really want you to focus on is how these lessons flow together, right? And so how lesson 1 relates to lesson 2. Right? And so you should be able to state that, and there should be a rationale behind putting them in the order that they're in, and how lesson 1 flows into lesson 2, and lesson flow from lesson 2 to lesson 3, right? And so on and so forth. So this is just a duplication of that over and over again for however many lessons you have, so that you can think about what it is you want students to know or be able to do, what you're going to do during the lesson, and then how that lesson fits to the next lesson. Okay, so give all this a look over. Again, there's a couple other documents that are up on Blackboard. We will spend some time in class talking about this, but this should get you started.